Good morning, everyone. I'm Diane Petrella, and I'm Dean of the College of the Arts. And it is my honor to welcome you here today as we begin our two-day symposium around the exhibition currently on view at the KSU Museum, Textures, the History and Art of Black Hair. I welcome all of you here attending with us in person, as well as everyone attending via live stream. Textures, the History and Art of Black Hair is not only the most ambitious lone exhibition ever by the KSU Museum, but it is also one of the most consequential. By bringing together artwork and artifacts from around the globe, the exhibition asks us to pause, to look and reflect upon the complex and diverse perspectives and ideas that swirl around something so basic as hair. As the exhibition shows, and as we will certainly unveil in these 2 days, Black hair provokes joy and celebration, as well as turmoil and struggles. It is politicized and it is scrutinized. It can reveal racism and also connect us to history and ancestral knowledge. This project was made possible through the generosity of many, but especially our lead sponsors, Procter & Gamble with My Black is Beautiful and Bank of America, and also supporting sponsors, L'Oreal, Dark & Lovely, and Carol's Daughter. These 2 days are also supported by the Kent State University Research Council. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the co-curators of this exhibition and your guides for the next 2 days. I am so proud that they are faculty from the College of the Arts. Dr. Joseph Underwood is an art historian and assistant professor, actually just notified that he is now an associate professor. Congratulations. In our School of Art, and Dr. Tamika Ellington was our assistant dean for the college and a professor in the School of Fashion before she sadly, for us, left us to pursue a new career as a leadership and empowerment coach, which she is excelling in, by the way. And again, thank you for joining us for this symposium. And now please help me welcome Dr. Underwood and Dr. Ellington to the podium. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. This has been something that we've been anticipating for a very long time, so we are very excited that you are here with us.
Yep, really excited to see what conversations happen over the next 2 days and to see the legacy of these things as they live on online in our archive along with all of our other virtual resources.
Yes, absolutely. And so we are going to just kind of give you a little bit of information about how the exhibition and the symposium came to be. And so the conceptualization of textures came from a series of things that I've experienced myself as a Black woman, hair traumas that I've experienced, the fact that I've been doing research about Black hair for about 20 years or so. I started as a master's student. That was my very first research project, and I just stuck with it because it was still such an important topic to me. And then also, too, just my desire for really wanting to be able to break down and deconstruct the stigma that society has about Black hair. And with the partnership of Dr. Joseph and his curatorial expertise, we made a perfect team, and that's how the Textures exhibition has come about. And if you haven't had an opportunity yet to take a look, you will have some time to be able to go through during our breaks to check the exhibition out.
It was a really important concept for us to have an interdisciplinary collaboration coming from lived experience and the fashion world, and coming from art history and representation in museums, where there's been a history of violence and misidentification, misrepresentation. So it was really the perfect kind of collaboration, and our exhibition is the first to blend together the realms of fine art, material culture, and kind of high and low, bringing together these artifacts that range from ancient Egypt to 55 artists who live and work in Africa, the US, the Caribbean, and other parts of the diaspora.
And so the conceptualization of the Textures Symposium itself comes from the fact that Dr. Joseph and I have done different types of programs as well as other elements to the show, because we want the show to be able to live well past when it's uninstalled. The show will be up through August, but we really wanted to be able to have another element to this show that people will always be able to remember and that they can go back and take a look at. And so that's the reason why as we're doing these presentations, everything is live streamed. It'll be recorded. Those recordings will also be available on our website. Our website has a long list of all of the presentations that we've done since we began this project, but we really wanted to get a chance to combine. There's so many different research topics that can be had about Black hair, and so we wanted to combine history, sociology. My research in particular was the social, psychological aspects about Black hair, so I looked a lot about self-identity and self-perception, the art and media, and of course the culture of Black hair.
We're excited for this to join the other resources that include the Digital Green Book, which is a compendium of 15 Black barber, salon artists, and braiders from the Northeast Ohio region, and that is available online. It also joins things like the catalog, which was published in 2020 and is now in the third printing of global sales. So clearly, the topic is not only relevant and timely, but it's been long overdue.
Absolutely, and I just want to say one thing about that. One of the comments that we experience, we've been blessed enough to have gotten lots of media press about the exhibition, and something that we were kind of surprised about, I know I was in particular, but there were so many people telling us how trendy the topic of Black hair was, and I remember one of those conversations correcting the person and saying, this is not a trendy topic, this is something that's been going on for thousands of years that Black people have been dealing with. And it's important that people know that this is a concern and that it's been a concern and that it's time to really deconstruct the stigma of Black hair.
Well
Absolutely, yes. I think that's it. And now we're gonna start with our presentations. Do you know where they are?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you go ahead. There we go. Okay, our first presenter is Einav Rabinovitch-Fox. She teaches U.S. and Women's and Gender History at Case Western Reserve. Her book, Dressed for Freedom, The Fashionable Politics of American Feminism, from which this presentation is taken, examines the way women used fashion to redefine feminist identities and agenda during the long 20th century.
So good morning, everybody, and thank you for Tamika and Joseph, and thank you for coming on this very rainy day. I'm really excited to be here, and my presentation, kind of like to start the morning, will look at more of the history of fashion and appearance in the Black community. And during the 20s, thousands of African Americans, many of them were young women, left their homes in the rural South and moved to the urban industrial centers of the Northeast and the Midwest in what would come to be known as the First Great Migration. Seeking a better life and to improve their economic status, as well as to escape the violence and horrors of the Jim Crow South, these migrants were centered in cities like New York, Chicago, Cleveland, and Washington, D.C. While moving to the North and Midwest did not necessarily free these migrants from discrimination and segregation in housing, leisure, and employment, Black Americans nevertheless used these urban settings and the opportunities they provided to redefine their place in society. The rise of cultural industries such as music, print culture, as well as fashion, transformed the marketplace into a politicized public sphere and offered new ways for Black Americans to celebrate a modern racial and political consciousness while pushing for demands for gender and race equality. Like their white counterparts, young Black women discovered that visual appearance created through clothing, makeup, and hairstyles, was pivotal to the construction of Black modernity and a useful mean to assert new freedoms. In particular, the image of the flapper, with her short hair, skirts, and overt sexuality, offered middle-class reformers, young Black migrants, and new role models such as female performers and blues singers, a way to harness her fashion and the image to redefine notions of beauty, respectability, and freedom on their own terms. For these women, beauty and appearance became intertwined with questions of racial progress and inclusion in American society, offering a way to make claims for equal citizenship that move beyond individual expressions and preference. In looking at how these women utilized fashion trends to expand definitions of beauty and appropriate body displays, as well as challenge discourse of inferiority, respectability, and female beauty, my presentation foregrounds fashion as a critical political realm that enabled Black women to carve new position of power from which they could actively participate in gender and racial politics, claiming their equal place in American society. Although their ability to act on an equal footing with whites was circumscribed by discrimination and their access to economic resources, by appearing fashionable or in up-to-date flapper styles, Black women could nonetheless expand the boundaries of female expression and negotiate a gender, racial, and class notions of womanhood and modernity, creating in the process a new ideal of Black beauty. Fashion and appearance offer an accessible route to challenge white racist stereotypes regarding Black femininity and beauty, becoming crucial and indispensable elements in racial uplift projects and in fighting for racial equality. As one editorial in the magazine Half Century claimed, many white people are under the impression that there are no pretty colored women. Let us show them that all beautiful hair is not straight, that all beautiful skin is not white. Using the power of photography to convey middle-class notion of Black respectability, magazines such as The Crisis, which was the official NAACP newspaper, and The Messenger, a very important literary magazine associated with the Harlem Renaissance, presented portraits of accomplished, beautiful, intelligent, industrious, talented, successful women as an example of a new Negro womanhood. These images used to counter the derogatory image of Blacks in the white press of being ugly, masculine, and brute, while refuting charges of moral inferiority and sexual promiscuity. These photographs usually featured light-skinned women dressed in the latest fashionable styles, simply adorned with jewelry, oftentimes a pearl necklace, and occasionally light makeup. As celebrations of the achievements of the race, these images not only suggested a link between modern fashion and economic achievement, but also served as a form of proof that Black women could indeed be fashionable, beautiful, and successful. It is important to note, however, that these types of images, despite the complex intra-racial politics of color, did not seek to emulate white beauty standard, but to create a new Black ones. Indeed, although a color hierarchy among African Americans existed, it was more complex than a simple preference toward light skin and light features. Moreover, the Black press differed on the question of what skin tones define ideal Black beauty. Magazines such as The Crisis and The Messenger tended to feature fair-skinned and light-featured models as emblems of Black beauty, but Half Century, for example, though no less dedicated to the cause of racial uplift, also presented dark-skinned, bold-featured women as symbols of Black beauty, thus challenging the color hierarchy that preferred light skin as an ideal. In addition, although natural hairstyles have yet to enter the mainstream in the early 20th century, Black-owned companies like the one of Madam C.J. Walker emphasized in their ads that they were not promoting hair straightening products or in an attempt to emulate white standard, but instead marketing the notion of good and healthy hair to celebrate Black women on its own terms. And Madam C.J. Walker that you see in those advertising was kind of like the face of her company as well. And class also played a role in shaping Black appearance and presentation. In general, middle-class African-American women who embraced the modern image of womanhood adapted the notion of respectability to consumerism and consumer trends to their standards of propriety. A picture of the Covered Wagon Whist Club, which was a middle-class group from Washington, D.C., demonstrate how middle-class young Black women adopted the prevalent mainstream flappers styles and hair while also still complying with respectability standards. All the women in the photo are wearing bobbed hair, makeup, and jewelry, mostly pearl necklaces, as you can see. The women in the front are all wearing French heels and stockings, a sign of respectability and modesty. And thus the image of the Black flapper did not mark a break from the notion of respectability so much as it expanded the concept boundaries. Yet as the 20s progressed, young Black women began to adopt a more brazen appearances that expressed modern notions of femininity and challenged notions of respectability. By adopting the flapper styles, these women could claim access to the growing youth culture and the promises it entailed, thus asserting their equality with whites through their appearance and leisure choices. A photograph of these 6 Howard University students captured the ways in which young women used their public display of fashion to share the same kind of liberated social lives that their white peers enjoyed. Depicting a group of young African American women sitting in a stadium, all dressed according to the latest fashion with short hemline dresses, close-fitting hats, jewelry, and short bobs, these women presented a modern, urban image of Black femininity that symbolized women's new sense of self and status within their communities and beyond. Adopting the flapper styles also became a means through which Black flappers could challenge intraracial, gendered, and class notions of propriety, arguing that the flapper styles improve women's health, contribute to their beauty, and express their freedom. As Dorothy Embry, the leader of the Harlem Subdebs Association, claimed in 1927, "Hurrah for shorter skirts, they give us more freedom of movement. Hurrah for less clothes, they give more health." In demanding the right to wear short skirts while also maintaining their standing as respectable girls, Embry and her peers challenged the gender and class notions among African Americans regarding the place of women in society, reclaiming the image of the liberated Black flapper as part of their identity. And while no doubt these college students' class and education facilitated their participation in the fashion world, the rise of the ready-made industry and the growing access to consumer culture that urban life offered migrants enabled also for working class women to participate in the construction of Black modernity. And I apologize for that quality of photographs, but that's what we have, unfortunately. And again, as you can see from this photograph, while many migrants who worked as domestic workers or in factories did not have the time or the opportunity to dress according to their personal preference during work days, they used the custom of strolling in city street during Sunday to display their fashionable taste. In performing a public self through clothing every Sunday, these women could reinvent themselves and assert control over their bodies and appearance, far from the supervising eyes of their white employers or the confining realms of middle-class propriety. Despite middle-class reformers' concerns that the flapper would further stigmatization of Black women by whites, the popularization of new forms of leisure and their extensive coverage in the Black press helped to legitimate the Black flapper by the mid-20s. Particularly, photographs of beauty contestants and fashion shows, many of them were organized and sponsored by reputable organizations like the NAACP, capture the extent in which the flapper fashion had become part of the aesthetics of respectability. Participating in fashion shows and beauty contests also enabled working class women to claim a respectable status even if they did not achieve important milestones such as college degree or business success. Moreover, fashion shows and beauty contests serve as a useful avenue for political action, as the Black press campaigned for the integration of beauty contests, arguing for the recognition of Black beauty and its equivalence to white beauty. And the cultural mainstreaming of the Black flapper also opened up a space for other forms of gender performances and class defiance that challenge middle-class respectability in more overt ways. Images of bathing beauties, which were beauty contestants appearing in swimming suits, offered an alternative model of Black femininity which young Black girls could identify with. And again, these images read not as emblems of promiscuous femininity or sexuality as they might have seen a decade before. Bathing beauties managed to form a positive connection between sexuality and racial uplift, presenting an image that challenged the notion of respectability and at the same time also enable it to expand. And in addition, the rise of the cultural scene in Harlem and other urban centers also offered new role models of Black femininity that celebrated a much more sexualized and bodily beauty and provided an alternative to the middle class notions of respectability. In particular, it was the female performer, the dancer, the vaudeville actress, the blues singer that became an important figure of modern Black femininity. These performers turned fashion into a spatial experience and a performative self, using beauty and attire to reclaim female sexuality as a source of female power and pride. Singers like Ethel Waters, Gertrude Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, and others became famous as flashy dressers who loved shiny clothes and jewelry, both on and off stage. Presenting a commercialized image of sexuality, Black performers became new trendsetters and a new ideal of beauty and femininity within the Black community that allowed women to stretch the boundaries of propriety and to imagine themselves as equal participants in the growing consumer culture. As models of Black glamour and working class beauty within Black popular culture, blues singers and female performances became the new standard bearers of an increasingly sexualized beauty ideal. Yet the celebration and the emphasis on sexuality was not limited to heterosexual sexuality alone. Blues singers such as Bessie Smith, Ethel Waters, and possibly also Alberta Hunter had relationships with women. Not only did they represent an image of female sexuality that challenged Black middle class notions of respectability, but at the same time, but these same expressions of sexuality also define heterosexual gender construction. Fashion and clothing, again, proved to be the link between the blues performer's image and its gender-defying image. Some adopted a more boyish elements of the flapper fashions that open up a space for gender ambiguity and greater freedom in terms of sexual orientations. Others, like the performer Gladys Bentley, performed in masculine clothes, usually a tuxedo, that push even further respectable notions of gender performance and feminine beauty. In their adoption of flapper fashions, blues singers expanded understanding of Black modernity and respectability within the Black community and offered their own alternative interpretation for a more white, slender, mainstream flapper image that circulated in popular culture. Singers like Bessie Smith and Ma Rainey, whose bodies did not conform to the flapper ideal, reclaimed the image nonetheless by adopting the styles, thus presenting a Black body as a fashionable and desirable. Although both performers and respectable girls capitalize on the flapper image and fashion, the performer's version carried with it a considerably more sexual undertones and as such provided legitimacy to celebrate women's sexuality without shame. So to conclude, whether they chose to define the notion of respectability or to expand its boundaries to include more commercialized expression of sexuality, Black flappers employed fashion to construct their own understanding of Black femininity. As they adopted new styles as a way to assert their individuality and personal taste, Black women could gain some control over how others perceived and judged them, as well as using their appearance to claim racial pride. Instead of tool of vanity, fashion and appearance became the means to assert their identity as women, as modern, and as Black. Thank you. Yeah, okay.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yep. So we now have time for questions, and we can carry the mic around to anyone who has a question for our first presenter. And you can flip back to any images that are relevant. Right.
Sure.
I just have a comment.
Sure.
Thank you so much. The presentation was beautiful. I loved the accuracy and everything that you were talking about, the full history. Like, you were able to really break down the migration, breaking down feminism, breaking down social capital, all of that. I just loved it. You did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there an opportunity for Black designers of that era that catered to the Black clientele?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So fashion always offered a route for Black mobility, either as a way to escape slavery. The designer that made Mary Lincoln dresses was an ex-slave that bought her freedom through her designs. So, and there is an effort in the Black community to channel women from domestic work to design and dressmaking as a way to think that this type of profession will give more independence, more economic mobility. So there are definitely Black designers there that are catering to the Black community. But again, these are also, they're also designing for white customers, right? This is, despite the segregation of the industry, because the ready-made industry and the fashion industry in general in America is built a bit different than the French one. We don't know, right? There's no name recognitions of designers up until kind of like the more later in the mid-20th century. So, but that anonymity also enabled Black designers the freedom to design for white audiences because their name was not kind of like known enough. So it actually give them an avenue to gain positions, both for white employers, but also as independent dressmakers that serving both their community, but also other customers. Yeah.
So, good job.
Thank you.
I learned a lot. I didn't know a lot about what you said. But my question is, you talk about the politics of the 20s, but can you give differences or similarities to what is happening today?
Sure. It's a good question, right? And I think, and again, there is always the tension between are you celebrating like Black beauty on its own terms, or kind of like, right, the attempt to passing and the attempt to emulate white culture? And I think there is more, I mean, but the notion of like Black is beautiful and the notion that we're not emulating whites, right? I think that a lot of people do kind of like associate it with more like later on, and what kind of like what I'm trying to say, no, this conversation happened already in the 20s, right? So it's the same very much conversation about how fashion and beauty is not only a political stance of like saying black is beautiful and you need to acknowledge our beauty, and right, the fight to integrate beauty contestants did not started in 1968. It has a long history of doing it, and that understanding, right, that we need to define black beauty on our own terms, right? That it's not vis-a-vis white society always. I mean, it's always kind of like there is that conversation, but there's also kind of like an intra-racial conversation of what beauty means, and you know, it's not always consensual, or like there's no always a consensus, right? There are those tensions between kind of like light features and black, and the role of black skin, the role of black hair. But I think, right, those conversations that we're having still today can also be informed by the past. And I think part of it is that people think, kind of like what Tamika said in her opening remarks, that people think, oh, this is a trendy thing, this is a trendy conversation. No, those conversations have been happening for at least 100 of years, if not more than that.
The gentleman that asked about designers. So Zelda Wynne Valdez, she was the very first black designer who opened up her shop in New York in the Fashion District in 1935. She was very well known. I think she also was the designer. I think she was the one who designed the Playboy bunny costume.
Yes, she was.
Yes. So she was one of the first designers that was well-known African-American designers that actually, you know, had a presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Ann Lowe as well, who designed Jackie Kennedy's wedding dress.
Ann Lowe, yes. Zelda Wynne Valdez.
Nice.
Zelda Wynne Valdez and Ann Lowe. Actually, Ohio State just acquired a couple pieces from Ann Lowe. They had So the Ohio State Museum, the Fashion Museum, they have a couple pieces from Ann Lowe that they were able to acquire. So I was really exciting about that. Yeah.
And the National Museum of African American History in DC has a really great collection of fashion, and not just Ann Lowe, but also Wynne Valdez and other fashion designers that were active, kind of like, so it's really worth a visit to DC.
I just want to make a comment. Basically, I grew up with my grandma always talking about strolling, you know, and how they would dress. So it was great to see this in the context of expanding the lexicon a little bit as well. And this whole self-identity piece, and helping to understand what strolling meant, because so many people in my rural community were domestic workers, and so the only time they had a chance to dress was on the weekend. And I just wonder whether that connection also ties into the fashion that we see in the Black church on Sunday as well, because I would think that when you compare this whole the occupation of most of African American women, especially during that time period as domestics, this is the time that they can dress, you know, whether it's strolling on a Saturday or that dress in a church on a Sunday, which still continues today. When you talk about looking at then and now, you see that within the Black church today, especially with the hats and the pearls, you know, those kinds of things. So thank you for that.
Sure, yeah, and definitely, I mean, the church is, right, the runway, no less than the streets, right? So it is the room to make yourself.
Since this is being live streamed, will we have access to the questions that are being asked on the live stream for answers also?
That's a question for the organizers. Thank you.
So be careful what you say.
Thank you for that presentation.
Thank
when
you.
you discuss the need for examining black fashion, beauty, aesthetics on its own terms, I get really excited. But I come back to the question of, for the black flapper in particular, what makes her black other than the fact that she is a black woman, like aesthetically? If the hair looks akin to white women's hair, if the dress, outside of being made from black designers, is, you know, the same aesthetic, how do we disseminate down into the actual, you know, materiality of the black flapper? What makes her black other than her skin, especially given the diversity of black skin complexions and like the fair skin flappers that you presented who were black?
Yeah, no, thank you. This is a great question. So there are subtle differences, and there are part of this politics of respectability that a lot of middle class black women had to kind of like comply with to some degree. Despite the fact it's very similar, you do see kind of like more modest or less flashy type of styles among black women. You know, it's still like the short skirt, but it might be kind of like an inch longer, right? It might cover the knee in like when in 1926, when kind of like the mainstream fashion was kind of like more above the knee. So there is still this notion. I mean, there are still, as I showed in this picture, which is a good. I love this picture, so it's like a good reason to bring it up again. And you can see, I mean, for example, there's less of a showing of the shoulders. So it's very subtle styles differences, but they're still kind of like, right, the fact that they're still wearing stockings. Also, I think maybe for kind of like, you know, the 21st century eye is not necessarily, oh, what's the big difference? But in 1920s, you know, part of kind of like the sexual liberation that the white flappers symbolized, and white flappers could have, you know, pushed the envelope a little more than black women, was the fact that they did not wear stockings, or kind of like they rolled them, right, they rolled them down so you could see where they are. And this type of sexual expression was kind of like still off the limit for black flappers because of the racial politics and kind of like the threat of rape and violence that women, black women, not just because of their class, but mostly because of their race, could not have pushed the envelope as much as white women could do. I mean, and again, black celebrities like Bessie Smith and other blues performers had this celebrity status that allowed them to push, right, more those conventions. But for ordinary black flappers who just wanted, right, to have fun, they're still confined with those politics of respectability. So the changes are subtle, but they are, and they're trying to do as much as they can, right? There are, and there are reclaiming the image, even though kind of like, right, the popular press would not show, it's a very limited image in the end of the day, right? The one that you see in advertisements and in popular culture, but they are reclaiming this image, and they say, we also have the right to define it, right? We also have the right to participate in how this image is defined. So again, it's not like big revolution, but it's a small thing.
Okay, so let's thank our presenter again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will take time to set up our next presenter, who is presenting virtually. But again, keep logging your questions for the end of the session. And we'll begin that right at 10:30.
For those of you that may need to use the restroom is going to be located right outside the double doors. There's going to be double doors here in the hallway. If you go right out the double doors, there's the restroom, men's and women's restroom. If you're in the museum, there is a restroom on the first floor in the atrium. on either side.
Just get them started.
And he said in between presentations he'll go to like a generic shot on the,
Okay, perfect.
so they don't watch us like clicking.
I wonder.
I was like, can we mute the PowerPoint?
Yes, okay. Start first. Oh, jeez. I'm assuming we should be on mute, or no?
That's a good question. Hi, Annette. Can you hear us? Yeah.
This is our first Zoom.
Okay.
Should we be muted or
No.
no?
Nope. No
And then-
video on. Can she hear us?
I don't know. We can't
We
hear
haven't
her.
heard her yet, but
Okay.
maybe this is muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I can hear you too. It's just not real loud.
You can hear us. Okay.
Yep, we're good.
Do you want to practice sharing your screen real quick?
I think
Yeah, my computer with the PDF, I can scroll down it, but it doesn't load the same as a PowerPoint. But let me show it to you and see what you think. I mean, I can scroll this way.
If you open the actual file on your desktop, like not in Google Drive.
Uh-oh, something happened. Ooh, okay.
So yeah, just open the file actually on your desktop, not through like online.
Oh, okay.
If you want to leave that there, I know how to turn it on and mute it.
That's
Okay,
yeah.
great. Easy enough.
Well, what I was trying to do was go through that drive that you had us do. Do you not want me to do that?
That's allowing our tech people to share a high-res image, but you should still just, like, wherever you saved the PDF on your computer, or you could download the PDF from the Google Drive onto your computer.
Okay, got it.
And I'll show you
Okay.
how to do it full screen.
Okay.
Go ahead and refresh that window.
Okay. Why don't I just go into slides here?
Okay. Yep. Perfect. So now go, exactly, you've got it.
All right, so we're good, right?
Yes. And so just
Okay.
here in a minute, we'll introduce you.
Okay.
And then I don't know if there's a way to kind of.
Well, it's kind of nice to see.
Is it? We want to see her, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, shoot.
There you go.
Yeah, that's good, yeah.
Okay.
So right at 10:30.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone, we're going to get started again with our next presenter. Dr. Annette Lynch is a professor of textiles and apparel at the University of Northern Iowa. Her presentation will focus on exploring the changing meaning of Black girls' hair in Jacqueline Woodson's memoir, Brown Girl Dreamin', as the narrative moves in both space and time from the South to the North, and from the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement to the era of the Black Panthers and Angela Davis. And Annette is a good friend of mine. She and I were both members of the organization, the International Textile Association. And, what just happened? Did she just get booted off? Okay. Well, she and I were members of what they call ITAA. That's the largest organization in the discipline of textiles. And I met her at one of the conferences, and I had been doing my research about Black hair, and she has a granddaughter who is biracial. And she came to me and she said, I really want to understand more about Black hair. My granddaughter, I want to be able to connect more with her and to be able to help her through her womanhood. And she and I became friends. We became research partners. And actually, she's one of the authors that's working with me. I'm in the process of publishing a book with the Kent State University Press called Navigating the Black Hair Phenomenon in a White World. And Annette Lynch is one of our authors. Hopefully she'll be getting back on in just a moment.
Hello?
Hi, we can hear you. How are you, my sister?
Well, there was a problem with the other computer. Somewhere or another, whatever happened on your end crashed that other computer, so I'm on a different one.
Okay.
I can share screen. Have you done my introduction yet?
Yes, yes, we're ready for you.
Okay.
Okay.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, I'll try. Okay,
Okay.
good. Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can all hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry about that technical problem. This is Annette Lynch, and I'm presenting from the University of Northern Iowa on some research that focused on using memoirs to provide really authentic routes to lives of people that qualitative data can help bring to life. And so this is an analysis of the role of female relatives in the management of Black girls' identity in the 1960s and 70s. And it's done through a memoir written by Jacqueline Woodson, Brown Girl Dreaming, that won the National Book Award in 2014. Jacqueline was raised in South Carolina and New York. She was born in Ohio. And the poems throughout this book, she shares what it was like growing up as an African American in the 1960s and 1970s, her experiences of Jim Crow, and also the growing awareness of the civil rights movement during that time period. Our research, and this was done with Tamika, illustrates the really authentic use of memoirs as a route into the research subject. You can really kind of feel that authenticity at the beginning of the book as she's talking about the naming process, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that later as well. But name a girl Jack, my father said, and she can't help but grow up strong. Raise her right, my father said, and she'll make that name her own. And I think Jacqueline Woodson definitely did that. Our methodology was to mark and code all references to hair and appearance throughout the entire memoir. There were a total of 40 different references to hair. We analyzed a total of 144 poems. 28%, so over a quarter of those poems included hair references, which I really think speaks to the importance of hair as an identity marker, also as a way of manage identity, both by the self and by the relatives of girls during this time period. Hair was also linked a lot to memories. 17.5% of the linkages we found were linked to memories. Fundamental to this research is sort of the foundational work of Irving Goffman and the idea of appearance management. When a child is dressed, the parent or caregiver is attuned to the audience who will be reviewing and assigning meaning and value to that coded appearance. This became very, very real to me as I was watching my daughter raise two daughters. My daughter was raising biracial kids in the Chicago area, and watching her sort of decide in what context she did a lot of the intricate braiding, and watching her also sort of navigate and learn how to do all of that as someone that didn't grow up with that tradition and knowledge was something that motivated and made me interested in this research. And these are pictures of my two granddaughters. The female family members' management of girls' identity is introduced really early in this book as a theme, along with hair. There is great debate about the naming of Jacqueline when she was born. That was a good enough name for me, my father said, but the women in the family said no, they really wanted Jacqueline, and hair comes into this really early in terms of patting the crop of thick curls, tugging my toes, touching my cheeks.
Annette?
And so that association of the female members of the family having a lot of say in identity creation comes out early in the book. The book really moves us from a birth in Ohio into South Carolina. And as we move into South Carolina, you really feel the importance of hair management as they're navigating the new terrain. On the bus, mother moves with us to the back. It is 1963. It is South Carolina. Too dangerous to sit closer to the front and dare the driver to make her move. Not with us, not now. Me in her arms, all 3 months old, my sister and brother squeezed into the seat beside her, white shirt, tie, and my brother's head shaven clean. So you also hear comments about the management of her brother's identity. We focused on, again, girls' identity, my sister's braids, white ribbon. So a special attention to making sure those kids are managed in terms of how they're visibly sitting on that bus. This is in Ohio, my mother says.
Annette.
Excuse me, Annette, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yeah, we need, we believe your screen share might be. Can you pull up the screen share on your end? I think we're not receiving from you, unfortunately.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well.
We don't see your presentation, your PowerPoint.
You don't?
No, so just try the share screen button again and we'll pick up there.
Okay. All right.
It'll take over when it...
Why we're having so many technical problems here. You see that now?
We're going to leave her.
Yes.
Okay, I want to hit. Yeah, sorry.
That was good.
All right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yes. So if you just
Thank you.
make it full screen.
Okay. There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. The changes as the family is moving to New York City. What happens is the mother goes off to New York City and the daughters stay with the grandmother, and later they will move to New York City. But one of the big memories that's talked about here is sitting in the kitchen on Saturday nights, getting their hair done by their grandmother, the Dixie Peach hair grease, the sizzle of the straightening comb, the hiss of the iron. So 17.5% of our noted comments about hair throughout the poetry and memoir really did focus on these memories and the role of hair in sort of creating the memories of family connection throughout the memoir. As the kids move into New York, there's a promise made by the mother to maintain the religious connections for the kids in their new environment, and she does find a place for that. It's interesting that again you have the Saturday night pressing of the satin ribbons. You You also have the oiling and pulling back into braids. This really struck me again as I was sort of thinking of my own daughter. Our mother's hands less sure than our grandmother's. I've actually been able to witness my daughter learning to braid my granddaughter's hair from Nana, who's their father's mother, and that whole process of passing down those skills, and also the anxiety related to being a young mother doesn't have those visible skills. Again, management of identity as the girls are going out with the watchtower in their hands, going door to door. Sky blue ribbons in my hair, my watchtower held tight in my white gloved hand. There are references obviously to dress as well, but hair, the doing of the hair is really central to how the mother is creating an appearance and an identity for these kids. The bringing of kind of the Afro into the book and the natural hair movement is really an exciting and interesting part of the textbook. You have Robert coming in, who's a male relative in his afro. Obviously Jacqueline wants the same hairstyle. Everyone in the neighborhood has one. The music is going on and really influencing a lot of the looks of that time period. What becomes interesting is the way the mother does the hair compared to what she has the girls wear. The girls are really encouraged to wear the more traditional styles during this time period. And here you have the mother justifying that process. And so it's interesting getting inside these years where you do have some of that transformation of hairstyles happening, and the difference between how a mother might wear her own hair and what she's allowing your child to wear. I think there's a lot of cautious management of child's identity by female caregivers during this time period in order to ensure that they'll be well received in the playgrounds and in other places. To just kind of close at the end and talk about the relevance, I guess, of this project to me personally, one of the, and maybe generate a little bit of discussion and question and answer. This is my oldest granddaughter and her aunt at her fifth, when she was about 5 years old. There was a hair straightening ritual that was held as a part of her 5th birthday party, and that was controversial within the family. There were questions surrounding my daughter was not supportive really of having her daughter's hair straightened. Some of the aunties wanted it straightened, some of them didn't, and so that whole discussion about the management of girls' identity. The aunt that she is standing with is a corporate, very high-level corporate leader at a major corporation, and she really has always straightened her hair in that context. And so the role of hair straightening in order to reach the top of her corporation, she felt was necessary. And so some discussion or questions about some of that ritual that happened to my own granddaughter really was fueled in part by this memoir. Are there questions and discussion from the participants?
Yes, we're going to go around right now, and Joseph will have the microphone and people can ask questions. If you can't hear the question, Annette, let me know and I'll let you know what the question is, okay? So you can go ahead, Joseph. Does anybody have any questions for Annette? Okay.
Well, again, I apologize for, one of the things I'll do is bring Jacqueline in a little bit with this.
Oh, yeah, yes.
This is one of the early slides. Jacqueline Woodson, if you're not familiar with her youth fiction, is an incredible writer for kids as well as adults, but I think really tells stories that go inside of culture and really help us understand better.
Yeah, as Annette mentioned, one of the things that really fueled the beginning of this research between she and I is because she had a question for me about the straightening of her granddaughter's hair, because once her granddaughter got to 5 years old, you know how it is in the Black culture, oftentimes that's like a rites of passage. You know, when little girls get to a certain age, it's okay now to straighten their hair. And Annette had came to me and asked me about straightening the hair, and that there was a little bit of contention in her family, you know, about the whole idea of straightening the hair, which, you know, that just goes to show not only in the Black community do we have that, but also in biracial families, that is also an issue. Okay,
Good morning.
We have a question, Annette.
Good morning. Annette, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. I want to go back to the piece on the Kingdom Hall. I was wondering if it came up in your research regarding the aspect of the Kingdom Hall's stance on trending looks, especially since it mentions the correlation, the comparison to Michael Jackson and what's happening with people visibly, because I know that there's this aspect of religious practice that you avoid trending looks, and I understand that it points to the fact that the mom also wore an afro, but with children, you know, staying away from that aspect of hair.
Yeah, I think it was a more general, and this in part also was influenced by the grandmother back in South Carolina, and the mother trying to replicate in many ways the cautious and careful presentation of those granddaughters. When the mother took over that role, the mother did go live in New York for a while, came up by herself, came back, brought the girls to New York, and the dress styles were also that she put the girls into were much more cautious and conservative than what she herself was experimenting with. And so I think what the concern is throughout the book is that people wanted to be careful with their daughters, even at a point where they might be pushing and trying to create more empowered versions of themselves. One of the things I teach as a fashion instructor is fashion brand empowerment. And when you're, for example, a transgender student in my class, and you create a empowered version of identity and you're 22 years old, that's a lot easier to do than it would be if you're in 6th grade and you're trying to deal with being called out in the hallway for the identities that you're, so I think there's that cautiousness that the caregivers are giving as these kids are going through stages where they might not be ready to be in that empowered space, which does require maturity, but also the environments that kids end up put into are sometimes much more forced. And this is in the memoir. You know, you end up in a hallway that you don't have any choice about being in that hallway. Adults tend to have, at least to a certain extent, adults have a little bit more control over the spaces that they're put into. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I also wonder how much of that is actually just parents maintaining Black hair. You know, it's a process, it's time consuming. And so I just wonder if it's not so much freedom of expression in hair, but just the mere fact that you have to do hair, children's hair for a couple of hours routinely, and just putting it in a maintenance style that can be maintained for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I think that that has a lot of, I mean, again, after witnessing, this is something I didn't know anything about until my daughter was in the role of caregiving. And now I go up and partake, and I'll sit in the kitchen while all this is going on. And it's time consuming. But once it's all in the little braids, and, you know, there's some stability for a period of time where they, you know, she doesn't have to get up in the morning and help the kids do their hair. So I think your comments are very valid.
Yeah. One thing about the book is that the girls that were the characters in the book, they actually spent part of their time in the South with their grandmother, and then part of the time in the North with their mother. And so, as Annette was talking about, of course, in the South, wearing an afro in the South was going to be more dangerous, because remember back then, wearing an afro was considered rebellious. And so, you know, they wanted to help the girls maintain some of that quote unquote safety. So, yeah. I think we have time for one more question, if anybody else has one more question for Annette. Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Annette.
Well, thank you, and I'm sorry about the technical problems, and thanks for the tech support. It really, your patience is appreciated.
Yes, thank you. It was wonderful to see you.
Okay, wonderful to see you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The representation of black
So, our next presentation, if technology allows, we will watch the video that the artist recorded. She's from France, or she's from the Caribbean and now lives in France and speaks French, and she wanted to record it so her English could be as clear as possible, but then she will join us via Zoom for the live Q&A, right? If it all works. So, Masa Zodros is a digital artist who is represented in the Textures exhibition. She is of Caribbean origin and lives in France, where she obtained a DEA in political sociology and a diploma in fine arts with the option of photography. Her presentation carries the question of the presence of Black individuals in the visual arts of Europe before the period of the slave trade.
The representation of Black in Europe before slavery. Masa Zodros. Thank you again for receiving me. I'm honored to participate in this symposium, and thank particularly to Joseph Underwood and all his team for giving me this time to express myself. Please excuse me before for the pronunciation. I would like to add to my presentation that this research had led me to define the concept of Afro-European classicism in my work. I will explain it later. I leave you in the last slide the reference of the book I quote. Moreover, I must say that the reproduction of images are under the law, fair use, in France, article L22.5 of the Intellectual Property Code. The classical period in art history. The Latin term classicus means one of the first rank, one who belongs to the upper class of citizens. I let you read more. Classicism is a period where art and pictorial representation of men and women was undertaken as a way to shape minds, to give legitimacy to an established social order, to reinforce or affirm a power. The religious representation were skillfully painted by putting forward certain categories of people. The pomp, the simple, put forward transmitted a message to the populace. The pictorial representation, as the TV and the film today, had thus a primordial importance to assert and legitimize an ideology, a way of seeing the world and to direct it. The Afro-European classicism that I defend as an artist, Afro-descendant, is an alternative response linked to digital technology to the official narrative of our history, and an idealized way of representing what could have been or has been. Identity of the character, but also the technique used. A modern revival of a hidden pictorial technique and an alternative answer to the official narrative that it shaped. To take this media, to take back this pictorial period of the European classicism edifice of a political evolution of the world is an answer almost that revolutionary in front of the official narrative and to the history revisited. The black figure on these steps is inescapable because representative of the construction of a new paradigm. The Renaissance, a period of renewal or change of social model. A simple internet search revealed the presence of a black figure in Antiquity and the Middle Age, whose symbolism exudes religious adoration, power, and legendary wisdom. Further back in history, Rome, like Greece, was a multi-ethnic, multiracial society with many black or mixed race kin, black popes, black commander, soldier, sailors, and court citizen. Progressively, the taking in hand of the spiritual expression by the state power in place will impose a very different version. The book Black African in Renaissance Europe proposes to show the variety and complexity of African life in 15th and 16th century Europe, and how it was affected by entrenched prejudices about the African continent and its inhabitants, reinforced by the idea of environment of the Renaissance. The century of light and slavery. The Renaissance and the Enlightenment ideas would indeed have shaped the issue of right and equality of men, but not all men. This is a question that can be asked and that is widely debated today, especially when one remembers that the end of the 15th century saw the development of the slave trade and slavery of blacks. But let's look at what preceded the Renaissance, the hidden period of the invasion of the Moors in Europe, the possible origin of the black nobility in Europe. The period of the invasion of the Moors in Europe is very little known, but would have lasted from 8th to 15th century. The existence of the Moorish codes of arms dispute it. The invasion of the Moors in Europe seems to be climax. It's officially admitted that the Moors, or Saracens, brought Europe out of the Dark Age, thanks to their highly advanced civilization and culture, which spread through their art, science, architecture, and center of learning. The Moors brought Europe a considerable fruition, especially in the 14th and 15th century, when research into historical culture made decisive progress. With the invasion of the Moors, we understand better the birth and origin of a monarchy of a black European nobility, even if this origin seems even more ancient. A controversial author who relies on even more controversial author Egmont Gottfried and Mario de Valdés-y-Cocom offer us a confirmation. In Blue Blood in Black Ink, the author Natu Pedro Salami clearly explained the origin of Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz. If, like the historian Mario de Valdés-y-Cocom, you notice that the feature of Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz were visibly African, know that your vision is not truncated. This fact was also noted by many contemporaries of the historian, who claims that the queen, although German, was directly descended from a black branch of the Portuguese royal family. Indeed, Queen Charlotte was the direct descendant of Margarita de Castro e Sousa, a lady of the Portuguese nobility of the 15th century, with black skin, whose African origins are clearly recognized. And for good reason, it's enough to go back 9 generations to find the lineage of this family of the 14th century. We find Alfonso III, who was a Moor, therefore a black African. This is only one example among many other famous people whose African ancestry is denied or whom we suspect to have been whitewashed by the official history. but the description of the text of the time describes them as swarthy, dark complexion, brown, tiny, feature of prominent mouth, etc. In addition, the author adds this comment: "What if she really was black?" wonders historian Kate Williams. This raises many important suggestions about not only our royal family, but those of most of Europe, given that Queen Victoria's descendants are spread across most of the royal families of Europe and beyond. A very interesting reality. The question is to know how this royalty could survive and accept the enslavement of its fellow human beings. Did it participate? How did it react to the racialist theory that legitimized them, even if this royalty finally disappeared? I leave this question open: the attitude of this royalty and nobility, but also the condition and causes of its disappearance. But you understand that the erasure of the falsification of the identities, the whitewashing of the painting of certain characters of this period of the history is the beginning of explanation. The influence of the African presence in Europe at the aesthetic and pictorial level. Another point interests me as an artist and will fit more to the subject of this symposium, is the aesthetic influence of the Moor in Europe, observed through costume and popular festival, fashion and pictorial representation, but also, and paradoxically, the influence of the nobility in the injunction of whiteness. Before the wave of denigration of black people, there was undoubtedly a time where black was not the color of shame, but the color of nobility. We have seen it in the Antiquity and the Middle Age. Toward the 15th and 16th century, we have some evidence of the aesthetic influence of the black nobility, despite the progressive loss of its power and its eradication. The texture of the hair of women frizzy and go up in afro. The use for men a long and thick wigs falling on the shoulder. The fashion of the prominent buttocks in the costume of the women. The extravagance of the outfit with bright color and heavy jewelry for both women and men. In the popular culture of the neck Saint Nicholas and Black Pete. Elizabeth I, the injunction of the whiteness. Another characteristic is the use of makeup and paradoxically the injection of whiteness, essentially the passage from black to white. An important personality, Elizabeth I, offers us perhaps the opportunity to demonstrate through its pictorial representation the importance of the image. Elizabeth I is known for the excessive use of the Phoenician caesura, a white powder which she put to bleach her complexion. According to Lisa Edgeworth in her History of Makeup, during her reign, Elizabeth became a revered icon, the Protestant object of a royal cult, which clashed with the Catholic cult of the Virgin Mary. Elizabeth fought the Catholic throughout her reign. She also shaped the Anglican cult in the second half of the 16th century and thus established her power in the imagination of her subject. Elizabeth I was said to be a naturally beautiful woman. Lisa Edgeworth, in her History of Makeup, writes that a visitor to the court when Elizabeth was 24 years old described her as comely rather than beautiful, tall and shapely, with beautiful hair and dark skin. As Edwidge pointed out, Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth's mother, would have been dark-skinned, which would explain the dark skin of her daughter. The passage from black to white. Let us notice the use of the term dark of mild complexion that we often find in the description of the character of the nobility of this time. One passes for Elizabeth I of the term dark complexion to divine legitimacy, a purely personal approach, but which is based on the studies of the historian Mario de Valdés. It speaks about the medieval mysticism through notably the heraldical blazon showing the black moor where the black was synonym of divinity, wisdom, and justice. Thus, one passes from the divine darkness to the whiteness pronounced at the time of the Anglican worship or the Reform, which rejects the Catholic faith. The Renaissance and the Italian painters did not have offices through their work to propagate the sacralization of the whiteness on the ancient world. What was the place? The nobility, then black and mixed, in a situation to the least uncomfortable. According to Egmont Gottfried, with whitewashed portrait or by wearing white makeup, the dominant black elite gave an illusion of legitimacy. The French Revolution ended the old regime, which was a black and colorful regime where the high nobility identified with the many images of the Moor. Today, European scientists claim not to know why there are so many images of the Moor in Western art. Kings and nobles were apparently also recognizable by their black and colorful looks as nobility. The reason why before the French Revolution they painted their face white was to prove that they were supporters of the principle of equality. Egmont Gottfried demonstrated with numerous examples the falsification of identity, the whitewashing of many portraits of the 17th century, the erasure of the black figure in the revisited history of the modern era. I let you read my conclusion with Ronuko Rashidi. I simply add the last point. The African code, and it will be my conclusion, by their seniority and their knowledge, take part of the development of great civilization and also to direct them for the worst and for the best. I will finish with a series of personal work that inspired me this study, an example of what I understand by European Afro-classicism. Thank you for listening.
Hi, can you hear us? Bonjour, ça va?
Ah, bonjour.
Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation.
Okay.
So, Tamika will now field questions. Speak clearly so I can then translate it into French for Masa, and then she will answer and I will translate it back for you.
Better compris. Yes, better. Mais je suis avec. Hi, I'm fine. I'm going to translate a little bit for Maryse.
Oh, great. We'll do teamwork.
Yes, exactly.
Anyone have any questions for Masa? Any questions?
You have seen my video?
Yes, we watched the video. Maybe you could start by explaining how the historic representation of black figures from Europe has impacted your work. We saw some of your work at the very end of the presentation. So are you inspired by particular styles, or is it aspirational? Is it dreaming? Your earlier slide said what it could have been.
Yes. Yes. Oui, j'ai compris un peu. Donc, ça aurait pu être. Oui, c'est tout à fait une intuition, un rêve de ce que ça aurait pu être. So it could have been a dream for her. The history of black people in this part of the century.
A dreaming of what could have been.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I'm beginning to draw. J'ai commencé à dessiner. I'm beginning to draw the people around me, black people around me, and I work afterward to the ordinator with Photoshop. Yes, and the computer. The computer, and I dream a lot of a road, a new road, of a new road where no prejudices, no prejudices, and with no history of slavery, colonization, of that. So she wants to explain how could the world have been without this period of slavery, with black people like being victimized, something like that, less powerful, yeah. Do you understand?
Okay, we have a question coming, but just to put it into context, of course, as you all know, many times in religious art and diplomatic art, black people are oftentimes eliminated. And so Masa's work is a way in which she is envisioning what it could have been had there been imagery of black people in those spaces. And actually, Masa's work is on the front cover of the pamphlet that you all have. That's her work, and you'll be able to see her work out in the gallery as well. But we do have a question, Masa.
How do you negotiate the burden of depicting blacks in Europe in the past, today, without a colonial gaze that then subjugates black people to these negative stereotypes and roles?
Alors, comment on négocie les images historiques de les Noirs en Europe, mais on a toujours une vue coloniale. C'est inescapable aujourd'hui d'avoir cette vue. Alors, comment on fait ça avec les stéréotypes, les bias?
Les bias? Les préjugés. comment je fais dans mon travail.
Hein? Oui, dans ton travail, comment ne pas opposer le regard convivial un peu.
D'accord, d'accord. That is easy for me because it's my first feeling, and I begin to draw with this conviction, and I saw all the representation of my people.
Yes.
And I know in
My heart.
I know in my heart that we are a lot of lies on our history, on our ancestry.
Our ancestors.
Ancestors.
Yes.
And but today I saw that this conviction, this belief is not accepting, but it's a function of the. Non, c'est le rôle d'un artiste.
Yeah. Okay.
Comment tu dis?
So, artist. It's the artist.
It's an artist's role to
main goal
to get over this and to propose a new vision.
Artist's role to propose a revision, yes. Maybe time for one final thought or reflection. Here.
Yeah, I just have a comment. I was happy to see the Afro updo hairstyles and the extended buttocks. You know, when you go to museums, you see the artwork, but you never understand the full history. So I really learned a lot just knowing when you see these updo hairstyles and extended buttocks and all that, where it comes from.
Oh gosh. Elle a dit qu'elle a beaucoup apprécié votre perspective parce que quand on est dans le musée, il ne parle pas de ces esthétiques, soit les coiffures plus hautes, soit les fesses plus grandes, tout ça. Elle a beaucoup apprécié avoir ça dans la présentation et votre imagination de ce que could have been.
Yes, thank you.
I just want to mention how great it was to see the influence, the Moors influence, you know, in the history, especially wraps, turbans, and the heavy jewelry, and immediately I related it to the rappers, you know, and all the chains and the crosses and things that they wear, but had not necessarily, I think we don't often hear about that connection between the Moors, you know, and our current history at all. So it was good to see those visual representations in her piece.
Elle a apprécié avoir vu l'influence des Moors, surtout dans les turbans, dans les bijoux, qu'elle a fait en connexion avec les rappeurs contemporains.
Yes, tout à fait. Yes. I'm agree with that. It's a way to be, and the rapper as this.
They represent like African royalty
yes.
or something like that?
Yes, and it's, comment on dit quand on a les jeunes où c'est ancré en toi.
Okay, so it's in their blood, it's in the blood of the rappers. So because it's the mouth of the ancestors of the rappers, so that's why we can.
I think that it's a feeling that in a dream or in
in the Indian prince, I think. We
Eden Prince that we mean to have color, magnificence, luxury, luxury, colorful, yes. It's a fact that we must continue to have this comportement. Behaving. It's a behaving, and for the black people, it's an evidence.
Yeah, evidence. Obvious. It's obvious for black people to have this kind of representation about wealthy, luxury, lifestyle.
Yes.
It's in black people origin, ADN.
Well, yes. But it's not c'est pas une honte.
No, it's not a shame.
I believe that we must, on doit être ce qu'on est, quoi.
Okay, we have to be what we have to be. Something like that.
Right.
Be yourself. Be yourself.
Yeah, be yourself.
It's to display wealth and excellence, not to be showy. It's just in the blood,
Yeah,
right?
it's not a show off. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Another round of applause, because Martha can hear that.
Okay, merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. And yes.
She showed a picture of one of my distant relatives who was Queen Charlotte, and she made her look more black, so thank you.
Ah, yes. Elle a dit merci parce que elle est en fait en relation de la reine Charlotte. Et dans l'image que vous a montrée, elle était, elle a semblé plus noire. Et c'est visible. So elle a dit merci.
It's wonderful, wonderful.
Yes. Okay, and please check out Masa's website and Instagram and for more of these aesthetics. Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup à vous.
Okay. Technology, right? Wow.
All the way from France. Okay, our next presenter is Dr. Joseph Underwood himself. Joseph L. Underwood is a scholar and curator whose research focuses on artists from the African continent and diaspora. Recent awards include Arts Writers Grant from the Andy Warhol Foundation and a Tyson Scholar Residency at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. This presentation draws from his essay on the Textures Catalog, now in its third global printing, A Man. And after Dr. Underwood's presentation, we will adjourn for lunch, and there'll be a little bit more information about that in just a moment.
There are few things as universal as hair. A biological phenomenon that has endless social implications, hair is both alive in the root and dead in the strand. A seemingly banal material, but it has endless potential for metaphor, symbolism, and significance. In curating an exhibition on the history and significance of black hair, there are thousands of hair-centric artworks we had to consider from around the world. But there are also an infinite number of images in which black hair is not the focus, but nevertheless signals the status, agency, and space of its wearer. Though we ultimately decided to categorize the exhibition into the three themes of community and memory, hair politics, and black joy, the implications of black hair span so many historical periods and geographic regions that the nuances are as numerous as the hairs on your head. To that end, this curatorial essay for the catalog, it focused on an analysis of the role of the camera, asking us how to consider how photography by artists from Africa and the diaspora, artists who are in the Textures exhibition, they challenge the misconceptions that were wrought by non-African photographers during the colonial era. In his influential essay for the landmark Insight exhibition on African photography, art historian Olu Ogwibe unpacks how the quote-unquote voyeuristic camera of Europeans doubled as an instrument of war, end quote. As a point of departure, let us consider the rise of documentary photography in the United States through the lens of white Missouri native Walker Evans, to assess how the effects of colonial photography linger from the period into the 20th century. In this image, Evans shows one scene of everyday life as the Great Depression wreaked havoc across communities in the South. Only 2 years later, in 1938, Evans was honored with an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It codified him as a photographer of the American vernacular, an artist who could bring the sights and denizens of small towns to the national eye. Focusing here on the African American presence in Vicksburg, Mississippi, the photograph shows 3 men of moderate dress gathered outside the local barbershop. Given that it was a street scene, Evans likely did not ask permission of the subjects before taking the picture, and instead of meeting them in their space, i.e., the barbershop that they frequented, which was likely owned and operated by a fellow African American, the photographer took their likeness from a public space and later exhibited it somewhere else in the United States. This tendency to arrive from afar, then capture a so-called authentic or native perspective on Black life, but then distribute that image in an alternative context, that is a ghostly echo of colonial photography, and it remains problematic even today with travel and documentary photography. Did Evans know the particular history of the Black community in Vicksburg? Did he know that the town had elected African American Peter Crosby as their sheriff in 1874, only to later be held captive and run out of the city by white protesters, a riotous group who would go on to kill 300 Black citizens in Vicksburg and the adjacent counties because of their anger? Instead of a photograph that roots the Black bodies and citizens of Vicksburg in their context, Evans instead chose an aesthetics of decay, showing a dilapidated rattletrap building that was only brightened by posters for Camel cigarettes and cold remedies. Fortunately, as photography approaches its 200th birthday, generations of African and diasporic artists have also wielded the camera as a tool for self-fashioning, offering a corrective lens to European misperceptions that had more visibility and dissemination in the past. Contemporary artists like British Liberian artist Lena Iris Victor consciously combat this overwhelming archive of images. She says, quote, "I am taking on various tropes of ethnographic photography and turning them on their head, rendering the figures powerful and regal rather than vulnerable objects of fantasy or degradation," end quote. This is the first strategy of 3 that I'm going to address today from photo-based artists in textures, and her tool, her strategy is embodying the colonial trope, but then to claim agency of that Black body in those images. In photographing her own nude body, rendering the image onto canvas, and then painting it with a palette of matte black and 24-karat gold sourced directly from Ghana, this image from her Dark Continent series reclaims a century of disempowered women whose bodies were photographed, dissected, and labeled by ethnologists. The series title refers to the racist mystique about this diverse continent that homogenized it into one mass that was unknowable and primitive. As the blackness of her body reverberates against the shadow of the night scene, it is her hair that catches the golden celestial light. The fullness of the buns parallels the abundance of the full moon. Similarly, both forms evoke sculptural qualities, as the length of Victor's hair spirals in diverging directions, with stray strands winding away from the coil and the craters and crevices of the moon are signaled by thick impasto brushstrokes. The energy that emanates from these golden forms is palpable, electrifying what would otherwise be a still black night. She takes control of the colonial stereotype and builds a series of images that simultaneously undermines the problematic historic photos, but also asserts the agency of the woman to present her body, her hair, and her dynamic with the natural and celestial world. The practice of our second artist, Ibrahima Cham, is also rooted in archival images, but his strategy focuses on the work and legacy of African photographers from the 19th century. Besides the well-known studio photographers like Seydou Keita or Malik Sidibé, there were dozens of pioneering West African photographers who built careers alongside European contemporaries. Whether it was the Lisk Carew brothers, George Luterot, or Jonathan Adagogo Green, these were just some of the earliest practitioners who carved out a space for Africans to claim a sense of agency and self-determination from the photo studio, even while colonization was raging around them. A native of Saint Louis, Senegal, the artist Ibrahima Cham, who I still haven't shown you, he is inspired in particular by Mama and Salah Cassette, brothers from the middle-class family who operated between their shared hometown of Saint Louis and Senegal's capital of Dakar. Working primarily with young female subjects, the Cassette brothers used their camera to be one of the few historical records of this time that shows the sartorial and hair choices of women. It's a unique blend of local traditions and styles that were taken from newspaper and magazines that had begun to flow more freely between Europe, Africa, and the Americas. African photography has only entered the canon of art history, my discipline, in the last 2 decades. Prior to that, even images from these now famous artists were exhibited in museums with the label unknown artist. A lot of the original negatives and prints from these photographers have been lost, with only remnants being found across family collections and the personal archives of photo enthusiasts who were concerned about the visual legacies of Black Africans and wanted to preserve these. Ibrahima Cham is one of these individuals, a self-appointed archivist, and his collection is regularly activated by his own practice as a photographer. He seeks to restage and valorize the significance of these early African photographers. So this is the second strategy used by photographers in our exhibition. He uses contemporary art and living bodies today as vehicles to revive the memory of a collective past. From his vintage portrait series, he revives the interior studio of his ancestors by setting up a simple booth in the middle of the chaos of the market. He then asks young passers-by to pilfer through this collection of archival vintage photos, and he says, which one could be your great aunt? Which one was your great-grandmother? And so these young women choose a photo from the pile, and they position it in front of their face. He asks the sitter to put that over their face and give a space of living to the ancestor, even as it blocks and occludes their own presence. Cham views this as a corrective practice, where he simultaneously educates Senegalese youth about the world of their great-grandparents, but gives a new platform to these images, both in the moment of creating the photograph, but also in its eventual dissemination in books, lectures, and exhibitions. In this image, which is the one in the exhibition, a photograph by Mama Cassette from 1960 features a woman adorned in a 3-piece dress and head wrapped, bedecked with gold ornaments around her hairline and her wrists. Though the subject is unknown, the viewer is given enough clues about her sense of self, from her elegant costume to her striking pose to her assured gaze, to emphasize her personhood and individuality. And even though the face of the young woman holding the photo is obscured, we still see a cohesive identity projected by her self-presentation. Hair extensions formed into blue braids, a hoop earring, bracelets that feature the nation's colors of red, yellow, and green. But ironically, her screen print shirt is adorned with a black and white photo of a woman of European origin. It is almost as if Cham's fear of Africans overlooking their own artistic heritage seems to manifest in her choice to sport a commercially printed European portrait. Where Victor and Cham's processes begin with the archives of European or African photographers, Amber Ford has built a practice based on hyperlocality, brandishing her camera in the service of documenting Black communities in Cleveland, Ohio. Beyond the themes in her work, Ford also pushes the boundaries of what constitutes photography. From using the light-based technology of cyanotypes to autonomous techniques like using a digital scanner to create interesting installations that are photo-based. This is the third method of photo-based artistry, synthesizing traditional camera-based techniques with other reproductive technologies and an expanded sense of what makes a portrait. For textures, Amber offers two oversized images printed on silk. Pronto, of course, refers to the Pronto quick weave technique. The image is organized in horizontal registers, recalling the cutaway view of geological layers and strata built up over time. And as we excavate, it becomes clear that the artist has fashioned multiple hair pieces into this composition. These synthetic hair tracks are artifacts. They are extensions that once thickened and lengthened the artist's own hair. They're transformed by this integration into Ford's personhood and her self-presentation. They were once sterile hair pieces, but they now feel biologically activated. Specks of dandruff, coils of her own hair, uneven bits of glue, they betray that this hair that is sometimes so-called fake hair is actually very personal and intimate. For many women around the globe, the natural and synthetic hair industry is an integral component of self-fashioning. With competition between Black, Korean, and Chinese distributors, this multi-billion-dollar industry is more than just about accessories. Ford highlights the deeply personal nature of hair, whether it sprouts from your own head or gets integrated later. Pronto can therefore be read as a kind of self-portrait in which the body is absent. It reminds me of Althea Murphy Price's fanciful prints of barrettes. Like Althea Murphy Price, Ford employs a synecdoche, a stand-in. She isolates the hair pieces to encourage us to look more closely and recognize the biological qualities of hair. Ultimately, the works in this series, Amber's series, are printed on silk and installed in the gallery so they can respond to external stimuli. She manipulates the thingness of hair tracks, digitizing a three-dimensional object into something two-dimensional, only to return them to three dimensionals when printed on silk and they move in the gallery. The new materiality becomes further layered as we recall the various relationships between Black hair care and silk, with things like hair ties, turbans, pillowcases, etc. So as creative individuals who work with photography, whether in the traditional or the expanded sense of the medium, these artists exemplify the diversity of responses to problematic representation from historical photography. While their artworks cannot erase the many images that exoticized or pitied or primitivized Black people, they can call attention to these biases and undermine them. They can valorize the historic and contemporary authorship of Black visions and voices behind the camera. And they can innovate new vocabularies that help us delineate between personal and communal experiences of Blackness. I invite you to look at these photo-based artists out in the gallery with a new light. Thank you.
Okay, so now we'll take a few questions for Dr. Joseph. Does anyone have a question for Dr. Joseph?
I don't know if it's a question or not, but that the image from Vicksburg, Mississippi, I'm from Mississippi. And so I really appreciate you telling the story of how they went into these black spaces and then they took them out of those black spaces, not knowing the context of it. I graduated from Tougaloo College, and Eudora Welty also took photographs. The difference between her and Walker Evans is she actually went into these black churches and she had conversations with them. But the issue still was, how are you able to document something that you haven't really experienced? And how are you telling those stories? So I really appreciate you starting with Walker Evans and understanding that documenting black spaces and the black aesthetics from their point of view without actually going in and having that experience and exposure of that. So I really appreciated that. And just see that connection and how it flows to the current artists that you're speaking of. And I have tons of notes, so I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. That's what Olo Ogwibe talks about in his essay, which I highly recommend, is that the camera, when it was invented, it was supposedly neutral, right? You just point and click. It captures reality, it captures truth, but we know that the camera is much more complicated. It's not only what you crop out of the frame, it's which picture did you choose to print and share, and even historically, who had the ability to share their image. Even if an African could take a picture, can they print it as a postcard? Can they print it as a book? Can they disseminate it widely? So photography, even though it has this kind of scientific side to it, that it's more truth-telling than, say, painting or sculpture, we know that there are so many confirmation biases and stereotypes about the person behind the camera. And like you said, it's when you go into these communities, are you talking to people? Are the photos records of that? Or is it kind of a drop in and the camera as a tool that allowed you to maintain distance? But then you go and print the image and you show it, 10 time zones away.
This is just a petty semantics question. In the image of the woman who had the adornment on her hairline, she had the dress, very beautiful, yes. You said costume, and this is just me being petty. I'm thinking about Tiffany Haddish on the red carpet being asked about her costume, and she goes, "This isn't a costume. Like, this is a garment I had made by a famous designer," and it was read socially on like Black Twitter and social media pages as sort of a denigration of the care and artistry that it took to produce this garment and her performance of it, and performance a la Goffman, where she's negotiating herself in the physical world. And so I ask you, why do you call it a costume? Yes, why do you call it a costume? In what way does the medium of a photo presented on a screen permit the language that, I'm not gonna say dehumanizes the realness of clothes people wear and relegating it to a costume? No pressure.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And I was not aware of that comment that Tiffany made, so I wouldn't have thought of the word. I think I'm using it in a very generic sense of how one dresses themselves. But that's a sensitivity, and I really appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah. What's interesting is that the West African studio photography of this time, it was generally, it's like when you go take your high school portrait, right? You're like putting on your best outfit. And so I guess in that sense, we could easily say self-fashioning, right? More than costuming, because it is an outfit that this woman is not wearing on a day-to-day sense. She has her most illustrious hairstyle. She's maybe even borrowed elements of her dress from, the jewels or things from other people. And even some of the studio photographers had equipment and dress and backdrops available for people to sort through and choose. So I think the only way we could use the word costume then is the sense of when you are performing your best self. You are dressing and, but it's, you're right, it's all about the agency of that woman in doing that. It's not costume in the sense of playing a character, but it's in the self-fashioning.
Yeah, I'll comment on that too. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Tamika Ellington. I was a former associate professor here in fashion at the fashion school, and actually the term costume oftentimes is interchangeable with the word dress. So sometimes people will say clothing, dress, or costume, all meaning the same thing. Yeah.
But you're right, they can take on, the words can start to mean something different in a contemporary moment. So I really appreciate you bringing that to my attention.
That was a good question, yeah.
Thank you for this great presentation. And this photograph kind of like, right, and I wonder like if there's a difference, right, of the person behind the camera, right? Because what we see here is like, kind of like a person in a photo hiding a real person that is also a photo, right? But kind of like what I think the point that you're making is like, it's the person behind the camera that we don't even see that really makes the difference. So kind of like how, right, kind of like how this is different from this colonial eye of white people, that kind of like if there is something different to some degree.
Right, right, Ibrahima is not making a portrait of the young woman who holds the photo. What he's trying to show is the intergenerational gaps that have popped up and where he says there's a lack of respect for the heritage. So it is about revalorizing those historic photos, but what's interesting is that it's now two lost identities. It's not just the person in the photo who we don't know, but now with the younger person face covered, you don't know who that is either. So he's, in a sense, even the unknown photographer, right. Right, and luckily with the contemporary art market, there's at least now names attached to these photos.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'm Oswini Kwekwesa from University of Education, Winnipeg, Ghana. Thank you for your presentation. I love it. But I have a contribution and some questions. First of all, regarding the image, would you like to come back to the previous image? You have a question? No?
This one?
Yeah, this one. In West Africa, in Ghana to be precise, where I come from, this dress style is a classic. Just like we'll take the suit to be a classic. Right. So it's a major classic that is worn by women. And there are lots and millions of variations. Unlike what happened in Europe and other parts of the West, the fashion of Africa, or if you like, Ghana, is bespoke, where you go to your designer, do this for me, create this, add this, remove this from it. So there are hundreds of designs trickling on the market every now and then. So this is a classic that we wear. Just as what you are wearing, smoke, it's coming from parts of Ghana, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire, you know. It's a classic. There are about 10 variations of this in terms of color, in terms of cards. So that is why he's contesting the issue of costume. Because if you look at the past 3 decades, scholars who have made attempts at writing on fashion in Africa and in Ghana specific, they refer to this as costume, which push it as something anti-fashion. Yes. And so there's a group of scholars coming out, we call Research Collective for Fashion Decolonization. And we're contexting these particular terms, costume, tradition. You know, in other words, they would say it's a traditional dress, so it's removed from the realms of fashion. And that is what we're working on. So that's my contribution. Secondly, you mentioned about the commodification of this hair extension. I want to take your personal view on this hair extension. Because if you look at studies that have been conducted, it's about $6 billion a year, which is even bigger than the GDP of Africa. So what's your personal opinion about that? Because if you ask me, I have a challenge. Because these hair extensions are not created in Africa. It is rather the Asiatic countries that benefit from that, the economics of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I will say I have no personal stake in this conversation. So part of what we're doing with the exhibition was very much trying to center the artists' voices. And so Amber, you know, from my conversations, if I can kind of summarize what she would say, I am pushing back on the accusations that I hear as a black woman that my hair is fake. It's not mine. It's like costume. It's this thing that gets added in later. And she is saying it is all about self-fashioning. Just like you choose the clothes that you put on today that say something about you, if I am choosing to integrate these, they are my hair. So Tamika led a fantastic panel back in February about what you're talking about, which is the market of this and how it has been wrested from the hands of black business owners and how it's very complicated.
It is.
But I was referring to Amber's personal stance and how she sometimes has to defend her hair as not even her own. That it's, you know, it's something that is inauthentic and fake. And she's like, it's not fake. Like, this is my hair, whether I grew it out of my head or I integrated it later. And the methods of having worn the hair pieces, taking them off and doing high-res scans is a way of saying it's a self-portrait and saying, these are me. You can actually see my biomatter integrated into them. So the answer is two-pronged, that one is about the market and the stance and how that is complicated. We have another artist, Joseph Eze, whose piece in the exhibition is about the waning practice of the protective hairstyle of threading, and how that's even kind of become less popular in West Africa with the influx of wigs and hair pieces and extensions. So it's a much larger conversation, and here the point was to put it to the personal, where the artist felt defensive about these accusations that she had fake hair.
Yeah, let me give a little bit of context about that too. Here in the United States, there's still a lot of controversy about wearing fake hair. There's almost like this unheard of or unspoken divide between black women in particular, ones that wear their hair natural versus those that wear their hair with straight hair or weaves. And so oftentimes the ladies that wear those fake hairs or weaves oftentimes feel as though they have to stand up for themselves and say, well, this is a part of me, even though, you know, we all know that it's not, but it's their way of, you know, taking some ownership, I guess, and taking away the fact that many people believe that, you know, that should not even be a part of our culture at all, you know, having to wear wigs and that kind of thing. But it's difficult. It's a lot of, it's very sensitive. People are very, very sensitive about it. And unfortunately, we're still, and this is just my opinion, we are still brainwashed. And that's a lot of the reason why we're still wearing this kind of stuff in our hair. Is because we're brainwashed. We're, you know, trying to fit into aesthetic that we will never fit into. That's just my opinion. Somebody else had some.
I think the whole idea of hair and self-identity take a very different, becomes a very different perspective. I had locks down to my waist, natural, and I got cancer. So then, through chemo, I lost all my hair. As it was beginning to grow back, I had to go back into chemo, and I lost it again. I had to deal with whether I wanted to wear a wig or whether I wanted to remain bald. And I'm one of those who feel strongly about my natural hair. And so I was so glad when Wakanda came out, because then people thought my bald head was connected to the movie and the trend of that movie. But it really had a lot to do with my personal philosophy. My daughter, who has locks to her waist, says that whether you buy it or not, it's yours. You know, my thing was, I wanted to wear my own hair. And rather than go to a wig, I went bald. I would have loved to have seen some perspective in this exhibit that deals with that bald head, you know, from those of us who have had no choice, if we wanted to live. So that was the one comment I wanted to make about your natural hair versus extensions or weaves or whatever.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I had an opportunity to check out Derek Adams' exhibition at the Cleveland Art Museum. Yes. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see it.
Yes.
Or if anyone has had an opportunity to see it, but it definitely transformed, or better yet, expanded my understanding and appreciation for black hair in the wigs, in the extensions. He used the term superhero. He said when he sees women fashioning their hair this way, they look like superheroes. And of course there's more to that, but I just wanted to add that other element because I am definitely familiar with this discussion about natural hair. I had locks for 12 years, I cut it off, I'm bald. But understanding that there is, it is a complex discussion, but elevating it to the extent of appreciation for maybe something that a perspective that we don't necessarily thrive in, per se.
Okay, what just kind of came to my mind is oftentimes black people will take things that were originally started out as derogatory and then flip them and make them something of their own, like certain terms like Negro, right, or whatever. Black people were able to take that term and make it into something that we could relate to. So what Derek Adams was kind of talking about reminds me of this whole thing that, of course, when we first started wearing our hair straight, when we started wearing fake hair, oftentimes it was for assimilation purposes. We started off assimilating because we had to. It was a means of survival for us. But then, later on, we were able to take some agency back with that, and people are now saying that it's a superpower. The superpower comes into me having the option to be able to change my hair the way that I want to change it. And so it's still very, very controversial because many people still believe that if you want to wear fake hair, then you're still trying to assimilate. So it's really sensitive. It really is.
Thank you. My name is Marla Goins, and I'm a visiting assistant professor of Africana Studies at the College of Worcester. And I teach a class on the politics of black hair at the college, and I have students here with me.
Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, and I actually, this is an excellent conversation. I wanted to speak to something that you spoke about, Dr. Ellington, and hair straightening or maybe wearing weaves as brainwashing. So something that I have been theorizing, and actually theorizing with one of my colleagues in Brazil. As you probably know, there's a large Afro-descendant population in Brazil, and lots of the issues surrounding the politics of black hair are very much present in Brazil as well. So we've been theorizing this concept of reflexive hair dialogue, right? So I'm talking about our experiences with hair as a way to understand more the intersectionalities of black people and black women in other spaces, and also to help us understand our political experiences in our own context as well. And students have done their reflexive hair dialogue in this class. But my question is, being that hair straightening is a very controversial topic, how can we have dialogues around our hair practices and around hair straightening, which is more of a critical dialogue, but not about condemning women who do choose to straighten their hair, right? So a more nuanced, critical discussion, which helps us to really unpack those complexities and the experiences that women have and why they straighten their hair, but that isn't about condemning at the same time, but also doesn't, diminish the implications of hair straightening at the same time.
It is so complicated. I mean, as you see, we are past our time, and the conversation keeps going because this is such an important conversation, and it's conversations that need to be had, and that there's no way that we can solve it, you know, in a few days. But people have so many different opinions about their hair and about the way in which they wear their hair. When I meant by brainwashed, I meant that Black people, a lot of the things that we don't know about ourselves is because we're uneducated, and we need to get ourselves educated. And I think once we educate ourselves, things will change. Things will begin to change. You know, they will. But we are going to adjourn for lunch. Please come back at 1:30, right?
It will start at 1:30.
Yeah,
so
we'll start at, yeah,
come
we'll
back
start.
a few minutes before.
Yeah, come back a little bit before, but we're going to start again at 1:30. Out in the parking lot, we have Brooks Homestyle Barbecue. They're a Black-owned company, and we have them over in the parking lot. For those of you that are presenters, I actually have a coupon for you all, and you guys can get your meal for free. But everyone else, please go and partake, and I hope you will enjoy. We'll see you back.
There's a little map of downtown in the programs too, if you just need to orient yourself.